Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for this Lesson 6 Q&A. It is March 28th, 2022, and really happy that a few of you could join this morning, and I hope everybody had a nice break over the last week or so after a tough lesson, Lesson 5, which I think is one of the harder ones that we're going to encounter. But now we're on to Lesson 6, which is pretty straightforward. But maybe what I'll do here is we'll share screen. As soon as I can find it. There we are. All right. We will just get my little spotlight tool. There we go. Yeah, so again, thank you very much for joining us, everybody. And we'll just take a quick look at our Lesson 6 assignment, which is due next Monday on April 4th. And I think you'll find this to be pretty straightforward. We're really just going to dial into soils. So if we look at Lesson 6, you can see that there's 3 different things that we're asking for. We're going to look at soil mapping. We're going to look at soil testing as well. We're also going to look at soil narrative and analysis. So let us take a little bit of a dive into that. If you go on the Lesson 6 discussion board, you'll see there's a pretty good description right here all about mapping. So for students in the US, you've got an excellent, probably one of the best soil map services in the world with the USDA Web Soil Survey. So just clicking on that link and basically punching in your address. There's also a tutorial here, which might be super helpful for some of you. But you can dial into your site and get a very accurate survey output from that, and that's going to be part of your assignment. If you're not in the US, it's a little bit trickier. In Canada, well, in British Columbia, Canada, it's quite easy. We have really good resources here, but no matter where you are dialing in from, there will be some resource to access. So you want to look at that. And if you have any trouble with that, don't hesitate to drop me a note. I can certainly point you in the right direction. And that is the mapping portion. So we're really just looking at existing data on your project site. And if you're in an urban site, you'll probably find that it may be a little bit ambiguous, because when they go and create subdivisions, or as you can imagine, there's a huge amount of disturbance to the land with infrastructure coming in with roads and sewer and water. And often the existing soils are disturbed quite a bit. So don't be surprised if your soil map looks a little bit off. In urban settings, in more farm or acreage settings, it should be pretty accurate. That's generally the consensus we have. But what we're going to do after you get your mapping is we're going to go to testing. And if we click on this link here, you can see there's a lot of short videos on how to perform this. And if you happen to be if you happen to be in a location that has a lot of snow on the ground still, you can just take a peek at this section here. And we really want you to get, get an idea of how to perform the test, even if you're not able to access your soils right now. So this is pretty easy, and you're going to take 3 samples. And if you are in an area, if you feel there's quite a bit of clay in your soils, you'll probably find with this jar test that you have to let it sit for a number of days until it ends up settling out properly. So don't be surprised if that's the case. You do have to give it a little bit of time. And once you've done your soil testing, then we're going to look at basically the narrative. We're going to compare your sample with the soil maps, how close they might be. We look at the soil texture itself and some ways that we can build soil and what resources you may have that are nitrogen rich or carbon rich. So we're going to go through and touch on those as well as a SWOT analysis. And then if we look a little further along on this tab, we've got quite a bit in terms of resources. And there's one in BC, Canada here. I don't think we have any BC students right now. And then again, what I would highly recommend as you're putting your assignment together is you take a look at the assignment rubric just to make sure that you are including what has been asked for, because this is what we use as a guideline when we're grading your assignment. Okay. So what I was going to do is just take a look at a couple of samples. Again, if you want to take a look at some student examples, when you log on to the site, you go to modules, and then you would just go down to the resource section, and you can see here there's sample student reports, and there's 4 different reports here. Now, a little bit of a caveat is this template file that we're all working with has been modified slightly over the last couple of terms. So you may find, it's just some slight inconsistencies with the sample reports versus what you're asked to provide. But let's take a look at a couple here. And here's one student. So this is a great example of the kind of mapping that the USDA soil website will provide you. And there's some codes here which get translated. So basically we're asking you to take a look at the existing data and what is involved with that. What are the properties? In this case, it looks like sort of a loamy fine sand. And then we are going to be testing the soil. So here, the student has indicated where their test sites are and the microclimate, if that is found there, and the vegetation and the reason. So there's often a good reason to test that soil. Maybe you want to create a new vegetable garden there. It may be an area that's not doing that well and you're curious. There could be several reasons. So having 3 test sites is a good way to go. They probably will vary a little bit, and especially if it's in an urban location. Often as you get closer to the house, that soil has been more disturbed, so it could have more sand in it. And then this student here has showing their test site, and this is the data from the USDA soil web. So this isn't exactly what we want to see. And I'll show you why. We'll go to another student's example here. So this is the same idea. This is the data you get out of British Columbia, Canada, but very, very similar. And here there's the base plan showing the 3 test sites. And again, the reason, but this is the sort of page we want to see where we get a nice little snapshot of each test site. So here, test number 1, the microclimate and the reason, even an image of that, and then some of these initial results, the soil texture triangle and where your soil comes in, and the jar itself, that jar test with your quantities on the left here as labeled. So I will say that in person, it's probably quite easy to figure out your sand silt clay, but as you can see with the image, it can be quite difficult to determine if that's accurate or not. However, this looks probably like it's consistent with the test. So then we have a ribbon test and this percolation test, and then just showing the soil profile itself without any water in it. And you want to try and get a 1 foot deep hole, which is, it's basically the depth of a shovel. And then let me see here. That was number 1. So number 2 here is the same information. So here you see it's sandy loam with a medium to fast percolation, because this is always interesting too. And here's sandy loam, and this is faster. So this is 4.5 inch per hour, and here it was 3 inch per hour. So that's pretty similar. And then on that last test, it was extremely fast and emptied in 55 minutes. So again, this is more of a loamy sand, and here these are sandy loam. So similar but different. And then here's a narrative, a little summary. That's nice to see all 3 together. And then we get into a little bit of analysis and comparison. So here we're looking at some of our soil building resources that we would have on hand, some of the limitations of the soils, any notes that you have, and what resources you might have available and what might be close by. And then again, some of the goals and how are you going to do this. And then basically we get into a summary and you'll find some of this will get a little bit of repetition, but this is a very, in my personal opinion, the soil is something you want to cultivate, not your plants. So when I say that, it's just that whole top 6 or 12 inches that we're looking at here. That is what is driving all that nutrient cycling within your landscape, and that you want to definitely give some attention to. And with this section, we're looking at the mineral component. So we're looking at that sand silt clay, and that is really important and great information to have. But the one thing that we don't really touch on here is the life within that soil. And I would encourage everyone here to dive into that if you do have an interest in it. I've taken some classes here from Dr. Elaine Ingham. She's quite an amazing person in terms of her lifelong work with the soil food web. She and others developed the soil food web. Now, when I say developed, it's more discovery. So years ago, it was, very little, and even now very little is known about soils, really. But her and another team that were focused on aquatic microorganisms shifted their focus onto soils and discovered this amazing world that's underground. And it really is truly amazing. And a lot of it is so small, we just don't see it without the aid of a microscope. However, it is absolutely vital to the health of your plants and the health of the ecosystem around your plants. So that is something I would encourage everybody to consider. And Let us see what else we've got up here. I think we've covered that. Yeah, and Dr. Lane Ingham does these courses for farmers, for backyard or homestead people. So money well spent there if you want to learn more about soils. Let us just take a look now. I just want to see, okay, that is our Google document Q&A document here, and I don't see any questions on that. So I was just going to throw it out to everybody right now, whether anybody has any initial questions about lesson 6.
Yeah, hey Jamie, I have a question. This is Mackenzie.
Sure.
Um, for the soil jar tests, should I expect to see the water like before I test it and know it's like ready to be measured? Is the water actually going to become like fully clear? Should I wait for that? When do I know it's like done and ready to be measured?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, Mackenzie. And I think what you'll find is that once you place your soil in the jar and shake it up, obviously all that material is suspended, and it really does depend on your soil type. So where I live, it's
Okay.
a sandy loam. And, I could read it probably in 10 minutes because
Okay.
I have quite a bit of heavier granular material in our soils. If I had, and very little clay. So if, for instance, Milo, who's on the call here, another instructor, where he lives, I bet you there is quite a bit more clay. He's more in an agricultural setting, so he'd have finer soils. And if he did a jar test and shook it up, he might have to wait a few days.
A few
It
days.
might just be
Okay.
completely cloudy and you won't see
Yeah.
anything because those clay particles are just so fine. They take a lot of time to settle out. So
Okay.
I guess to answer your question, it depends. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, my client said when I was doing my samples, it was up there this weekend on Saturday doing the samples, and my client said, he's noticed he thinks that it's predominantly clay, like that the soil is predominantly clay.
Right.
And so, yeah, I did the samples. I mean, yesterday I put the water in them yesterday afternoon. I mean, they're still super murky. I can't see a clay layer at all. I can definitely see the sand layer at the bottom, but I was just I don't know. I tend to overthink things. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it'll settle out and you'll see that
okay.
really, really
You'll
fine.
see it'll be visible. I mean,
Yes,
I'll be able to tell when it's ready.
it
Yeah,
is
okay.
visible. It just
Okay.
might, it may take a number of days and it may
Okay.
not completely clear out before you
Okay.
want to submit your assignment. I don't
Okay.
know.
Okay.
So just wait as long as you can, and you'll probably get a really good feel on how it compares with your USDA map, that soil map. And from what I remember, it's an acreage site that
Yeah, it's
you're
like
look.
20 acres and
Yeah,
it's not cultivated land. It's definitely like raw forested land. So
sure. So it might match
yeah.
up pretty close. Have you looked
Okay.
at the map yet for the
Yeah,
USDA?
I have done the map. I did it a few weeks ago, and I haven't looked at it since. I'm here, neither here nor there, but at my office, I can't access my Google Doc, so I can't.
Sure,
I did
sure.
it like 2 weeks ago, and I don't remember what it says. But I'll look. Yeah, I'll look. I'll take a look at it this week.
Yeah. So I'm sure if you've got clay, it'll probably show up there. And
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Thank
oh,
you.
okay. Hope that helps you out.
I have a question, Jamie.
Oh, hi, Lola. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Hello, good morning, everyone. So I was very surprised with the results of my test. I live in an area where the soil looks basically clay,
Hmm.
but the results of that were loam, as if this soil is loam, which is the best for agriculture. And so I am surprised with this. I'm guessing it's loam, but it definitely need organic matter. But how can you explain something like this? Did I do something wrong, or there are two different aspects to it?
Yeah, no, not necessarily, because we are looking at the soil texture. and not the soil life,
Mhm.
right? So they are different. And I would even hesitate to, well, I would go out on the limb there and say with your project site, because it's a new build, that your texture will be a certain type, but you probably are dealing with a lot of compaction as
A
well.
lot, a lot.
Yeah,
So
that's
hard to make a hole.
it's completely normal to see that with a new home. As you imagine, all those machines that were involved with the construction, just the foundation excavation and the backfill, you know, it's a huge disturbance. And
Yes.
nobody really cares too much about compaction. They just want it all flat and make it look good, right,
Mhm.
in their eye. So you might want to take a look at a broad fork, as I don't know if we've talked about that before, but here, I'll just do a quick search here. It's a very common thing that I bring up in classes, is the use of broad forks. And this is very similar to the one I have. I was very lucky. Somebody locally in my area copied this and fabricated it. And I use this all the time. I use it on our installation projects when we're working on an urban site. You know, it's 9 times out of 10, we're dealing with compaction. So the broad fork allows for a mechanical means of decompacting, relieving the compaction while not disturbing the surface,
Mhm.
right? It is a brilliant tool. A lot of market gardeners use these that are into no-till applications. So they're not turning that soil over. They're merely decompacting lower down. There's all kinds of different models here. Where I live, there's a fair amount of rock and large stones. And this heavy duty, this is called the meadow creature. That's probably the heaviest duty model there is. And then there's these other sort of lighter duty items. And I think these would be excellent for fluffy market garden beds, but you might have trouble on your site initially getting into the ground with something like this.
Yes, so I can tell you that in New Mexico, my husband and I went to Home Depot, and they tell us that the only thing that will work is an iron bar.
Oh, yes.
So this fork looks wonderful, but I can tell you it will not go in this area. In my yard, it will not go in.
You might have to time it with some seasonal rains, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So if the ground had a higher level of moisture in it, you might find that it will go in easier, right? If you have a high clay content and it's dry, it'll seem like it's concrete.
Yes,
So
that's how it feels. But what I am finding is that even after the rain,
yeah.
the iron bar goes easily, something like this. After that is concrete. So yeah, I don't know. I can try again. I can buy a fork and see,
Yeah,
but no.
that would be, I think it would be a good place to start. The downside of the meadow creature is it's pretty heavy, and you need a fair bit of force to make it work in really compacted areas. One thing that I learned through Elaine Ingham is what she does in some areas is they'll basically core, they'll get an auger, so say a 4 or a 6-inch auger, and auger into the ground and fill the hole with compost, very high quality compost. And then they'll add compost extract or compost tea into that hole,
Mhm.
and then they'll move on and do another one. So the spacing of that is really subjective, but I had a site where I was looking at having to do that, but I managed to break into it enough with the broad fork so that I didn't, which was I'm very thankful of, because that's a huge amount of effort to auger out holes and put compost in. And so the whole reason with that is once you introduce the compost and then compost extract, so you've kind of created habitat for soil organisms with the compost, then you're adding those organisms, they will relieve the compaction over time. It will take some time, but they will do that. And how quickly they do that, again, is really subjective. There's no fixed duration, but that is one strategy, excuse me, one strategy I've seen. On larger properties, we've used keyline plows. Those are really useful, but on your site, that wouldn't work because you have a fairly small urban location. And I would try and avoid using things like rototillers, but you may find you have to use something mechanized as an initial aid to break up the soil initially, right?
Yeah.
But
And auger, they told us that they don't work here either.
yeah,
They only told us about a machine that has a kind of small shovel at the end. Like it's mechanical, like you dig with that. But for now, we are just using the iron bar. And of course, it's very slow.
yeah,
But yeah, for now, that's what we are doing.
yeah. Well, all of your efforts will pay off big time, because if you were to go and install the soft landscape, the living portion of your landscape in a new subdivision, and you ignored the compaction, you can imagine some of the challenges you might have with root development and water infiltration. So that base preparation is really critical, even though it's not particularly fun. You may also even want to get in a mini excavator, a small excavator that could do that for you pretty quickly, as long as you're, clearly identify where all your services are so they don't disturb those. But that's an option. Yeah. So I'd
I
be
have one
interested.
more question. Sorry,
yeah.
I'm taking too much time. So do you think in a soil like this that is so compacted will make sense to plant faba beans, like a cover crop of faba beans or radish to soften the ground, or something so hard will not work for that?
Well, I like the idea of the radish, or even a Daikon radish. Cover crops are a great idea. You can't go wrong with those, in my opinion, because they are going to just help you no matter what. They're going to help with your process of trying to decompact the area. But if you're only, how far are you getting in with the bar? About an inch or so?
Oh, with the bar, what I do, yes, about an inch. Then I remove the soil and I go again with the fork, another layer. So to plant a tree takes a few hours of work. I mean, not continuous work. I take breaks. My husband is helping too, but it is a long process.
Yeah, and I would, if it was me, I would be focusing all your attention on the soil preparation. I wouldn't put any plants in the ground until you feel good about the porosity of the soils that you've got there. Otherwise, the plants that you've purchased, they're used to a cozy pot and easy access to food and water, and then they're going to be dropped into a pretty hostile area. But yeah, but there are some deep rooted plants that you, now with New Mexico, I'm not as familiar with some of the plant material down there, but I would take a look at some deep rooted plants like a daikon radish that, you know, going to help break up some of that, but plants do have limitations too.
Yeah, okay.
You can't expect them to go through concrete, but they'll help you over time with that. So
Yeah.
I think Milo had something to add.
Yeah, I'll just jump in quickly, Lola. I can relate to your very compacted site, and it can be super frustrating to try and get started. If you do end up exploring cover crops, cereal rye is a great one. You might have to sneak it in right at the beginning of your sort of rainy season when it's cooler. But if you can get, I mean, cereal rye will grow on your kitchen floor. It'll pretty much grow anywhere, as long as you can keep it watered. And they have, for a grass, they have tremendous roots that can really penetrate even some of the most compacted soils. So maybe looking at something like that just to get a living layer going before you do any planting. And then for the broadfork, I agree with Jamie as far as their usefulness. And you can get these heavy duty ones. You can get them with 3 tines, which makes it even easier to get them into the soil because you only have to get in 3 times instead of 4. And I find having somebody that is a bigger build that can just jump on that bar to get it into the soil. You know, maybe you have to loosen it with the bar first, your digging bar first. But if soon as you can get some living layers, some plants established there, cover crop, I think you'll find it a little easier. But yeah, sorry you're having such a hard time.
So you say cereal rye, R-Y-E? So
yeah,
I
cereal rye. So it's just the grain, right?
So I just throw the seeds on the ground, or?
Yeah, you can just decide where you want them and just scatter the seeds, and, you know, rake them in or chop them in with a rake just to cover them a little bit with soil, and then keep them watered. And you'll want to do it. They like the cooler weather, so you'll kind of want to do it either right now or later
In the
in the
fall.
fall. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very
Sure.
much.
You're welcome. Good luck.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Milo. That was excellent advice. Right on. Yeah, hopefully that helps out, Lola.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there any other questions anybody had today? See more hands going up. Feel free to chime in.
Hey, Jamie, I actually have a question that kind of goes along with kind of the hygge culture and the development of those beds. My brother-in-law is wanting to do some hygge culture beds. He's got a lot of branches and trees and stuff that he is kind of clearing and thinning out. Now, I understand that using green wood in hygge culture beds can deplete the nitrogen in it as they're decomposing. So would that mean that we have to put like a higher nitrogen greens and stuff in there to help counteract that, or how does that work?
Well, that's a very good question. What kind of wood? When you say green, would it be like Douglas fir or what?
It's gonna probably be fir, the Douglas fir, also apple trimmings and prunings off of the apple trees. Probably also some prunings off of the chestnut trees. So a lot of different types of wood out in that area.
Sure. Well, I think cococulture is a fantastic approach. I've really enjoyed the experience I've had with it, and I've used different types of wood and at different stages. So I have used fairly green fir before. I've used fairly green wood off of some large fig trees. which ended up sprouting. So that was kind of a bonus. I got a tree out of it. But is in terms, I'm just looking for some pictures here of a workshop that I was at, and one of our instructors, Javan Bernakovich, put it on, gosh, 7 or 8 years ago. Just showing you the technique, the rough technique here. So hopefully I can find it. Okay. Yeah, because it's not just the wood. Well, I'll keep looking, but I don't seem to be able to locate that workshop. Too many photos. So the workshop I went to, oh, maybe that's it. No. The workshop I went to, basically what we did is we had a small, well, we had a backhoe, and we carved out a trench. So it was about 1 foot deep, and depending on the bucket size, it was probably 3 foot wide by 1 foot deep. And that material got put to the side. And then at the bottom of that trench, they placed the largest pieces of wood. So they were basically, submerged, right? And then as the pile was built, smaller and smaller pieces got put onto that. And then we ended up placing manure on top of the pile. We ended up taking some soil from the nearby forest, just little pockets, and placing that into the pile. There were some mushroom spawn that got put into the pile. And then all of that soil that was excavated out at the beginning got put on the surface. So it looked like a fairly large raised bed in the end. But there was no special treatment beyond that. You could do, I think the key to success in at least the Pacific Northwest with hugelkultur is trying to set it into the ground a little bit so it doesn't dry out too quickly. And of course, water will sit in there over the winter, which is completely fine because it'll just accelerate the decomposition of those larger logs. And I'm sorry I can't find my pictures on that. That's too bad. But that was basically the process. And I've done similar versions of that at home here where we live. And the one thing I have discovered with hugel mounds is if you go too high with them, you'll find that it almost has different microclimates on the mound. So the very top is like xeriscape. It's a very hot, dry area. And as you come down the sides, you're going to get more and more moisture. So that's something to consider. And what kind of crops were you going to put on your mound? Did you have?
At this point, I think we're probably going to wind up going, we've got a very hilly terrain. So I was thinking about doing some just slightly off contour hugelkulture mounds, and haven't really completely decided what we're going to be putting on there yet. Most likely more of the perennial stuff like blueberries and some more bushing, fruiting berry bushes on them. Possibly even doing, I've got kind of a mound, or I don't want to call it a mound, but a knoll in the middle. And I was thinking about doing some peach trees and some other trees around that and kind of using the contours of that knoll. And Definitely a work in progress.
Yeah, well, it's almost a case where you can do no wrong, right? Because all of that wood is going to break down and provide, an abundance of water holding capacity and nutrients for your new plants. One thing I would suggest is to maybe even for the first year, just see how it does with cover crops and annuals. Like they're beautiful to grow squash on.
Okay.
They're really, and the thing is, if you grow woody plants, let's say you planted woody perennials on top of the mound, and that mound is going to start settling over time, that can like blueberries will not want to be up there, so you'd want to have them planted on the lower edge. That would be my personal opinion. I did find the photos, so I can run through these a little bit. Let's see here. There you go. There's a backhoe, and this is well along in the day here, but you can see all the soil getting put on top of this, massive pile of brush, and all the larger pieces, of course, are at the bottom. I'll see if I got any of those early images, but there's a nice, see, that's pretty green wood. That's an alder.
Oh yeah, it is.
That's been freshly cut. There's a lot of alder in this particular hugel, and it ended up being fairly high, and this is a little bit earlier. That was the initial trench. And some of the spoil that was put beside it, but you can see, these larger pieces got put in the bottom, and then try and fill the voids with smaller bits. And even some of these rotted large pieces got thrown in there, and then sort of brush on top. And then, here's some, I think that, I'm not exactly sure what that was, but I think it could have been compost tea extract.
So you don't think there's any concern about the nitrogen robbing of the green wood in there? It doesn't have to be dried.
It's I think that it's going to be so slow.
Okay.
Yeah. I have not seen that. The hugels that I've done have been incredibly productive, and especially with squash. I use them for annual vegetable production, and they were way ahead of everything that was at grade, but they do need more water during the summer based on how high up that mound you have your plants.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to be going that high. Probably maybe 3 to 4 feet at the most.
Sure, that's great.
But yeah, we'll keep it somewhat tamed down. My clients don't live on site, so them being able to maintain it, going out just a couple times a week that they do, it is really important.
Yeah, well, they're very low maintenance for sure, and 2 or 3 feet sounds great. If you go 3, it's going to probably settle to 2 during the season, because there's all these voids that'll get filled. So you might want to, depending
go a foot higher.
Well, it depends on what you see ultimately as a finished height.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're great. I really enjoy working with them. I would say on a slope property, they're very, very valuable tool to slow water down. So I think you've got a great idea there, Carly. But I wouldn't, if it was me the first year, I would just try and control what's growing there, and even just cover crop it like really thickly, and just try and dominate what is allowed to grow. Because I've seen mounds that have had very little applied to them, and they revert to more of a chaotic state, which is fine but if it's something you want to have, it's all in the eye of the beholder. And if you want it to be productive for food, you definitely want to try and reduce that weed pressure right out of the gate. But that's my opinion. Milo might have something to add to that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, sure. I'm also a big fan of cococulture beds, especially in this climate, and especially when you have an excess of wood that you need to get rid of. It's a great way to deal with it. I would also agree with Jamie, and just if you can dominate that space initially with a cover crop, even a cover crop that you plant with your perennials, if you want to go in and plant berries right away. And if you do notice that there's berries and those woody perennials won't be as concerned with your nitrogen levels, but if you do notice that they're looking a bit anemic, or having a hard time getting going, you can always top dress with a nice layer of compost, or even some manure if they don't mind the smell. I mean, you can always, it's great about soil, you can always feed it from the top down, and I prefer to do that anyway. So that's always an option. You might find you need to add a little more than you would a normal garden bed with the hugelkultur after a year or so. But I think the benefits of it in the long term outweigh any risk of them sucking nitrogen out. And like Jamie said too, it depends on the wood. I mean, alder, for example, has quite a bit of nitrogen even in the wood. I think it's up to 5% nitrogen even in the wood of alder, so it breaks down extremely rapidly. And I think that's great that you have a mix of different wood that's going to break down at different times and feed the soil over the long term. I think having it slightly, I'll just say one more thing, I think having it slightly off contour is also a great idea. I've heard of some stories where folks have built hugelkultur mounds on contour and use them as swales, which you can run into issues with because, as there's a lot of woody organic matter in there, and especially on a slope, the water could punch a hole through that loose soil and end up with, kind of a mess to deal with if your swale gets hugelkultur swale gets a hole punch through it. So I think having them on a slight grade is a good idea, so that you can slow the water while not holding it back and creating a dam effect and risk it blowing out in the early years. Yeah, good luck.
Okay, thank you.
Well, great advice, Milo. Thank you very much for that. And hopefully we've answered your question, Carly.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And I believe Ralph had a question. I don't want him to go unheard.
It's okay. I'm very much enjoying listening to all this conversation. No, my question was about the jar tests. I don't know if anybody else is having as much trouble as I am at reading my jars. I know that my soil, it's probably going to be very sandy, but I'm looking at the jar and I'm having, and on one of them I could see the sand at the bottom, but I'm having a really hard time differentiating the other two layers. Okay. And on my other jars, it all looks like one thing. So yeah, I don't know. Is there like a technique? What I did is I took pictures just so I can have some data right now, and then I just shook them again. And I want to wait to see maybe if they settle again in a more readable state. But yeah, that's a good idea. That I've often done the same thing myself. If the test seems to be settling out in a strange way, reshaking it is a good way to go. And it does take a little bit of, I mean, the sand is a very easy layer to identify because it's larger particles. And then there should be a pretty distinct silt layer above it. If you want to send me, do you have a photo of because you can feel free to send it to me through, the inbox icon there, or you could just even post it on the discussion board. I can take a look at it there. Yeah, I have photos. Yeah, I could send them. I can or you can open my my presentation. I don't know if it's easy to see there.
You could even put it in the chat, I think.
Let's see.
Let's see if, I'm not sure if the chat allows for images. It definitely allows for links.
I don't see it.
Okay, well, I'm happy to take a look at it. I'm just trying to think. When you have you taken a look at the USDA? Oh gosh. I do have to take this call. Just 1 second. Okay, sorry about this. My dad, I'll explain in a sec. Hold on.
Okay.
If you could be brief, that would be super helpful. I'm just in the middle of a meeting here, but could I talk to you in 10 or 15 minutes? Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. My household is in a little bit of upheaval. My 102-year-old father was in the hospital for 8 weeks and just came home last week, and he's basically in palliative care, and we're looking after him till he dies. And I probably get we get 5 or 6 nurses here every day, and somebody overnight, and the phone rings all day, and so just having an hour without anything is challenging. So excuse me for that. So back to your question, Ralph. Yes, they can be tricky to see. When you shake up your jar, does it stay murky for quite like, if are you going days and days and days and you can't see anything, or are things settling out pretty quickly? It's just trying to differentiate those various layers.
It looks like it starts to settle down pretty well after a couple hours. Definitely within 24 hours, it's pretty settled down. I waited like 48 hours, just, I don't know why, but like the water gets pretty clear within 24 hours.
Okay. Well, that says a lot right there. So you're going to be probably leaning heavy on the sand end. And I'm trying to remember your project site. Are you in an urban location? Yeah. Okay. So for whatever reason, often these jar tests in urban sites, you'll have a little more sand than the mapping might show. So that it sounds like you've got very little in the way of clay, and you're going to have predominantly a sand and silt component in there, and the silt may be very, very minimal. But you should.
Yeah, the percolation, the percolation tests were all one of them was actually a little slower, but one was 2.5 inches per hour, and one was like, it was all gone within an hour. Like 10 inches of water gone in an hour. So
sure. Yeah, that's like where I live. It just boom, gone. Yeah. So all of this really helps point us in the direction of how we can make our soils better. And you know, where I live, and it sounds like where you are, increasing your water holding capacity is something that would really benefit your landscape. So then we start looking at organic matter, which is not really part of this test. If you have anything floating on the top of the jar test, that traditionally would be your organic matter, right? And we're not factoring that in. This is strictly the texture, but
yeah, I have quite a bit of that floating around.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, that's a good sign. So that's probably where this will take you, you know, through this exercise is, okay, if you have really high percolation rate, how can you slow that water down to a point where it's hanging around long enough to benefit your landscape rather than disappearing into the ground. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no, that helps. I was just I was just wondering if I was doing it right, but it sounds like I am. And it's just like additional information that seems to match with my other tests too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just it sounds like you're leaning heavy on that sandy component, especially if it's clearing quickly. So you may just have a really small film of silt on top of those sand, that sand layer. So, but I'm happy to help you, during the week. If you want to share your image, I can take a peek at it. They are very hard to differentiate, to view, but if you have just the right lighting on the jar, it does get a whole lot easier.
Yeah, I sent you the pictures in the inbox, but
Okay.
yeah, I was having the problem too. I was trying to find the proper location here to get as little glare as possible on the jar, and it's a little tricky.
Yes.
But yeah, if you do what you can there with the images, but
Sure.
I'll check over here too. Thanks for
Okay.
the answer.
Yeah, no problem. I'll take a look at that later today and get back to you. Any other questions regarding that, Ralph? Or
No, that was it.
okay. Well, thank you for that.
Sure.
Yeah, does anybody else have anything they want to throw out for discussion before we wrap up today, or? No, we're all good. Well, that is actually convenient for myself because I've got to attend to some stuff at home here, but this has been great, and great to see everybody back in the saddle for another 5 weeks. And this is a relatively easy week. So in comparison, we're going to get, as we go through lessons 7, 8, and 9, it'll progressively get a little more heavy duty, and you're all doing very well. And really impressed with the assignments that I've been looking at. So you should, congratulations to all of you. And if you have no other questions, maybe what we'll do is we'll just call it a day, and then we'll look forward to seeing your assignments next Monday.
All right,
Okay.
Thank you,
Jamie.
everyone. Thank you, Jamie.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah, no problem. Well, you take care and have yourself a great week.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye for now.
Thanks, Jamie.